there's ways that we can restrict this. The reason to have the term limit thing is, first of all, there's the burnout issue. What happens when cops go on and on? They get jaded, etc. Leads to a development of rackets. I'm not sure how they would look in a participatory economy, but you could imagine that it might be the case that people who have power, direct power, they carry guns and whatnot, that they might develop certain understandings in communities that, they get special attention, they get special services, they get this and that. We don't want that to happen. So we keep shifting them out before they have a chance, and there's less overlap between who's all cops at one time. So they can't develop these sorts of rackets that takes more than one person usually to do. Go ahead. Why don't you?
And then to the fraternity.
Okay, the police association. Now, here's one of the hardest parts. Police, just like any other workers' council, will they have a right to organize as workers? To some extent, yeah. But we're going to treat policing just like we talked about when we introduced some of these special institutions that fall in the political sphere. We're going to treat them differently. We're going to put more restrictions on what you can decide inside your workers' council. Well, certainly, who puts their desk where, hours of work even maybe, and things like that, all sorts of stuff like that should still be controlled by the workers. But how much of a product we want to produce when we're talking about cops, what does that mean? That we're starting to get scary there. Mm-hmm. So, and also, yeah, but then back to the ability for them to unionize against the community, maybe. The community is saying, hey, the police force is getting out of hands, and the police get to unionize against that? Probably not. So, yeah, there's another thing. We want to limit their ability to associate and unionize while respecting their right to organize as workers.
What about in other studies where, as soon as you turn 18, you do 2 years of sort of military service, and then you're done or something like that. And everybody goes through that, and that's a role of
yeah. No, because there's some people that we just wouldn't want to be cops. Okay. I like the idea that they have to really want to do it, and that we have to approve of them. Without that, we get and not just people that shouldn't be cops because they're assholes, because there are still going to be assholes in this future society, right? This isn't utopia. There will be assholes. People who just aren't good at it. People who don't like it. Especially if half their job is a community service role. I don't want to just look at these as authoritarian people. We need to start looking at them as people who can offer something socially. So we want them to be good at that, too. So we don't want to assume that everybody should do it. One of the other arguments that's similar to that is just that why don't we just all do it sort of as part of, why don't we all get some kind of training and do it all the time, and then we would never need cops? Well, again, maybe we don't all want to. I shouldn't have to intervene in a murder in progress, right? That's kind of scary. Is it assumed that someone is going to do this? No, we should be able to call on specialists who have the training and the equipment and the ability to respond to these types of things.
I'm sure you've probably thought of it, but it kind of sounds like you're making the assumption that cops will just continue to be armed, and specifically you just said with the equipment. I mean, okay. To me, that's one of the big differences there is removing the weapons from it, which is going to minimize a lot of what happens.
Yeah, there's going to be two more components that we want to definitely look at. One is going to be, do we allow them to patrol? I can't, and I've studied a little bit of criminology and kind of, trying to figure out if there's any value of patrolling. And there does seem to be some. It does seem to be that a lot of crimes, in low-level crimes especially, are actually decreased by the presence of police, by the likelihood that you might get caught in the process. What we don't see is that the types of crimes that we're going to define in our future society, remembering that there's an assumption that you have to have an overwhelming majority of the people in favor of a law in order for it to be passed. So we're going to have the most extreme stuff outlawed, and that's the only stuff that police come on to. Now, do patrols limit rape and murder? We've seen almost no evidence that they do. Assuming the police are really interested in looking for rape while they're out on patrol, but even if they were, these are crimes that don't necessarily just happen out, in the open. So the value of the patrol isn't very much. Now, the risk of the patrol, the reason I'm concerned about it, is what has been proven is that there are many, many, many more cases of police violence and police abuse when there are regular patrols. The more patrolling of a neighborhood, the more instances of police abuse are going to arise. That's our danger. We don't want folks out there looking for something to do when what they do in that part of their role is act as authoritarians. Okay. Now the issue of the tools that they're allowed to use. I don't know. We'd have to figure out a way that we could actually manage crime. People need to, if they're going to have this role, and we're going to ask them to intervene in certain situations, they will need the tools required to do it. If there's a need for a tool, we might have to say, well, you get that tool, unless we can prove that just having that tool is so absolutely dangerous that it's never possible. And now this is where it's going to start sounding weird. What if the tools are limited to the ones they're using against our movements right now here in the U.S.? These sub-lethal things. It's an option. I don't have it. When a cop uses a beanbag gun or a taser against someone who's about to kill a bunch of people, I actually prefer that they do that than that they shoot them. So I'm not saying that these weapons shouldn't exist. I'd prefer they not use them against people who aren't any threat to anybody else. But we need to be reasonable about this, and I might particularly hate these weapons, but at the same time, we might be able to find a valuable role for them. Go ahead.
I think it's important to look at what kind of things just the populace can have, to look at what the police can have. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Given how U.S. culture is, if we're talking about a 90% thing to pass a law, I couldn't picture 90% of people saying I'm allowed to have a gun. So are we talking about citizens being armed? And then we definitely have to be talking about cops being armed and the people whom they're...
Yeah, I don't know how we would get rid of the guns anyway. That's not part of any vision that I can really imagine by a long stretch.
Well, I mean, education. That's today. We couldn't get 90%, but we're talking hundreds of years.
Yeah, well, over time. Yeah.
And,
Go ahead.
and we can educate out of the need for guns.
John, you're pressing me. I was going to say, I feel like we need to, be more open-minded about what we consider tools. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in dealing with cops is, they have no training in fucking mediation, and they're supposed to be, resolving conflicts. I mean, I feel like that is a major component of it because, I would say one of our qualifications for cops would be, using violence would be their absolute last fucking resort. I mean, all other means of, things should be used, and one of those is communication. And I feel like, the import of that, we shouldn't really like that.
Yeah. Now this brings up something that I think is kind of it's perfect. The closure to this is the problem is that so we're going to train cops to be able to use the least amount of force that's necessary. So they're always going to have to by protocol. But the problem is if we decide that they might be in a situation that's dangerous enough that they need a weapon, that they're going to have it with them. That's dangerous. We want them, but they're going to have to use their judgment, okay? Now, we might also have an additional set of protocols when we're talking about having emergency response. An emergency response system might include that. Now remember, we have to call in order to cop in the society. They're not just going to wander out because they're not allowed out there, especially not in that role of being, able to use authority or force, okay? Now, an emergency response system might have a protocol that says we don't send a cop for everything, or we don't send a cop first for everything. We send someone whose role is absolutely not to be coercive, and then they decide if a cop gets called. Okay, so there might be whole nother layer there to prevent that someone with that weapon is going to show up at all. Okay, so we need another layer to this. We are talking about a new society where we get to build whatever institutions we need. And one of those institutions might be not just, aside from the police department, or to complement it, or to sort of make it even less necessary, some responders who have exactly the skills that you're talking about.
What worries me about what you're saying is, let's say, the strong man is hitting his wife or the kids. This first person you send, won't have the authority to make him stop. Well, I think that's one of the things the police do, at least in this country, that if their woman is being abused and the police comes, having that force and that authority, the man will stop, because there is the risk that you're going to go to prison. Now, if you send somebody, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. But the key thing to remember is...
And also the speed of, if they're not going around the street, the speed of them coming to you in an emergency is going to be relatively, it's going to be slower.
Maybe, but that's actually not true. Because of patrolling, and because of how difficult it is to maintain consistent patrols, sometimes patrolling causes slower response. It's actually just a fact. If I'm patrolling, but I'm on the other side of town, which is farther than the police station, then actually my response is going to be slower than if I came from the police station. So we have the potential to get people there faster with patrolling, but not necessarily. But